Horses Museum. Joining us now, Kent McCarty, a member of the Mississippi House of Representatives, represents District 101, that's Lamar County, serves as the vice chair of the House Education Committee. Good to see you again there, Kent.
Good to see you too, Gerard. Thanks for having me on.
You're looking good in your USM regalia. You guys are doing pretty good there.
Yeah, we're doing pretty good. We always do, though.
Yeah, absolutely.
TTT.
And you know who else does well that's from your neck of the woods is William Carey. How about that program?
They are, yeah. They're doing a lot.
Man, they're
across the board.
The NAIA World Series tonight, I believe. Is that right?
Tonight? Yeah,
I think so. I think it gets kicked off tonight. We're broadcasting it live as well, so looking forward to that. All right. Last time you and I talked, we were kind of doing a recap of the legislative session. It was a busy one, certainly. With respect to education, we got a brand new education formula. I think that was, you could point to that as perhaps the major accomplishment overall in the session, perhaps. Yeah,
I would definitely say, that's a huge deal, and we've tried, multiple times in the past to either change MAP or make changes to it or repeal it fully. And, we're really excited that we finally got a proposal that was doable, that we could get passed, and I think it's going to be a game changer for a lot of districts in the state.
Yeah. So it looked like it was on thin ice a little bit when it went.
To put it lightly.
It always is the case.
To put it lightly, yeah.
When we transmit those bills down the hall to the Senate and vice versa.
Right.
But you guys were able to come together.
Yeah. Here. Yeah, I think it actually fell all the way through the ice, and we had to pull it out and then dry it off and warm it back up, bring it back to life a couple of times. But it was. We were determined. I think we had a lot of buy-in on our end from members of both parties, and I think that I just took everybody coming to the table and the Senate coming to the table, and when we did that, we ended up with a really good bill in the end. So.
Yeah, I agree. So we had another, I'm going to call it a false start with respect to expanding education choice and education freedom. A comprehensive bill was drafted and was filed this year. But once again, really couldn't get a lot of support and traction for that, even in the House. And I think the ultimate result is that we're going to study the matter some more. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. I think that issue, we obviously hear from a lot of people about that, and I think that issue is one that we've got to be really careful with. I think it sounds good, and I think that on paper, and I think there's a lot of people that are bought into it, but I think we really need to be careful when we look at states like Arkansas and Arizona that have done, went from a smaller program like we have now that's very targeted that I think is relatively successful. They started there and then expanded, and I think you see in those states that the cost has run away a lot faster than they maybe expected. And like in Arizona, they're looking at almost $1 billion deficit in their budget. And they've attributed a good bit of that to expanding the voucher program and also doing tax cuts at the same time. So with us not being done, phasing in our last tax cut, and with more tax cuts on the table, I think we just got to be really careful with how we do anything like that may result in a huge extra cost that we're not currently spending.
So do you feel like then, Representative McCarty, that is part of this perhaps study, analysis, whatever you want to call it? I'm not sure if the plan is to form a committee, if you will, folks from various disciplines to investigate and further analyze this matter. Economics is going to have to be a big part of that.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's probably, there's other, smaller considerations we have to make as far as, what is the goal of a program like that. But I think the first one we got to address is the money side. And I think that's a very obviously huge factor. We are very fortunate right now that we're running a pretty decent surplus. But,
yeah.
As I mentioned, the tax cuts we passed a couple years ago are not fully phased in. I don't think even the corporate tax cut we passed now probably 8 or 9 years ago is fully phased in.
That's right, yeah.
So those things obviously are good. We're for tax cuts, but we've got to make sure that the budget is still sound when all that's said and done. And I think at a certain point, we're going to have to make the math equation of, do we want to talk about more tax cuts? Do we want to, eliminate the grocery tax or reduce the grocery tax that would put money back in everybody's pocket? Or do we want to spend that money on a voucher program that's very narrow and who it benefits? I think that's the question we've got to answer.
So the Speaker has indicated that he wants to continue to explore the prospect of tax reform and phasing in an elimination of the income tax that would also be accompanied perhaps by what was done in the very first bill, as you recall, a couple of years ago under Speaker Gunn, that was considered that would have phased out the income tax in fairly short order while at the same time increasing sales tax, general sales tax, but I think also decreasing the grocery tax somewhat, not fully eliminating. Speaker seems to indicate he wants to explore that some more.
Yeah, I think I think definitely in the off season, we didn't really have a real off season last year because we didn't have a real speaker until we all were expecting it to be Speaker White, but
limited on what he can do.
Right, exactly. You can only do so much on what we expect.
Sure.
So now that we've got a real off season, I suspect he'll be very busy working on, working with different experts on tax proposals, tax reform proposals. And hopefully we get to really dig into that next session. I think we've got 2 years left on the phase-in for the income tax cut we passed a couple years ago. So I know that in the past when we've had these conversations, we've all kind of the consensus has been, well, let's digest those before we start doing something new. So with that digestion on the horizon, I think it's probably time for us to start figuring out our next move.
Revenues are still in good shape. You've seen that. A slight decline in income taxes, but almost a corresponding increase in sales taxes, which was, I think, expected. We're putting more money in people's pockets. They go spend it more, and hopefully they're able to earn more income. Businesses produce more profit. I mean, that's at least the conceptual drive behind that kind of policy. So that's what's happening now. And then at the same time, we're seeing a significant increase in the budget. I noted that, but yet we still have the revenue to pay for it, so we have to, by law, balance the budget. But our overall outlays are up about 25% in less than 5 years. Is that a concern?
Yeah, I think as long as we work within the money we've got and we don't overdo it. I mean, if we were bumping up closer to like what we were receiving, I mean, I would be a lot more concerned. I think there's still a good cushion there now, but I do think we've expanded. We're spending more on education than we've ever had before. We've increased pay for all state employees at this point, but more than we typically do. We're doing a lot of those good things, catching up on a lot of things we couldn't do whenever we had stagnant growth for years. So I think it's it makes sense that we'd see a big jump like that, but if we're sitting here in 5 more years and we've increased another 25%, I think we've probably done something very wrong at that point. So I'd like to see the amount of money we're spending level out. As we all suspect the amount of growth in the revenue would also level out. But, I'd like to see those two things kind of converge, whether that looks like, what would hopefully would look like cutting some taxes that would bring the revenue down to kind of meet where we're at so that we've got a little bit of cushion, but not cutting it too close.
Explain to the audience also, Representative McCarty, if you don't mind, that when we put the budget together, we budget for a certain amount of revenue. Mm-hmm. And then we vote on and appropriate a certain amount of what's called support. There's a gap there. There's a cushion there.
Right.
So I didn't see the final numbers. I know I'm still waiting for LBO to publish their final reports. I've been in touch with them. I know they're working very hard to get that done. It's a lot of data they got to compile.
Right. And I will say, just a quick plug for LBO. Yeah. They, and I know you know this, but we wore them out this year on the education funding stuff. I mean, there were days when I don't think they ever even went home. They were just there all night working. So we've got a great, couldn't ask for a better crew of people.
No doubt.
They're keeping the budget numbers sound. I mean, I trust them. Right. I'm so glad it's them and not us because we could not do what they do. So
it's all-nighters. Just so
it
people
absolutely
know.
is.
It's all-nighters.
Especially there at the end of session. It is multiple days. I brought some of them coffee one day, and they were still there at midnight. I brought them coffee at like 7, and I was like, I don't think y'all probably went home, but just don't tell me. Just don't. I'd rather not know. So they do a great job. But yeah. So to your point, there's we have what we suspect revenue, what we estimate revenue, project revenue would be. Yeah. And then we spend a certain amount, usually much lower than that.
Right. We don't spend it all.
We don't spend it all. Not since I've been here. We don't even really come close. So there's some money, some of that automatically diverts to the rainy day fund. There's a cap on what we can do with that. So any of the money left over from what we don't spend and what we, when you take what we bring in, subtract what we spend, anything left over that can't go to the rainy day fund goes into other similar funds.
It goes into some other funds on the balance sheet, if you will.
Right.
And then some of that money is what happened this year may get appropriated out, for example, to the Department of Transportation.
That's right.
We sent them some additional money that augments, supplements what they receive from their normal revenue stream.
That's right. Mostly things that aren't considered recurring. Things like a lot of these road projects are one time. Big infusions of money projects like that come out of those funds.
Yeah, got it. Can you hang around for another second?
Absolutely.
All right, we got Representative Kent McCarty. We're at the Mississippi Armed Forces Museum at Camp Shelby, Mississippi. Stay with us. We're coming. Anchors away. The United States Navy. Appreciate that, Rhino. We're at the Mississippi Armed Forces Museum. That's because it's Memorial Day this coming Monday, and we are enjoying a discussion here with Representative Kent McCarty. Serves in the State House of Representatives. Represents District 101 that incorporates, it's just Lamar County, right?
That's right, yeah, just Lamar County. Really just a small little pocket of Lamar County.
Well, and a growing area of the state as well, doing well.
Very fast growing. And when we had to redistrict a couple years ago, my district shrunk considerably because of all the population that's moved into the West Hattiesburg, Oak Grove areas. Yeah.
So we were just talking about the budget. That's the last thing you guys do before you sine-die and head out of town. The last thing you do is button that up, pass that. We got a new budget. We're fortunate in that revenues have continued to increase, and that is even in light of the fact that we have cut taxes. Certainly the individual income tax. We passed a bill a couple of years ago to phase out the remaining 4% bracket, remaining as one of the three original 3%, 4%, 5% brackets that have been around a long time. We got rid of the 3% several years ago, and then you guys voted to eliminate the 4% and then reduce the top 5% bracket, phase that down to 4% over 3 years. I think we're in year 2 of that right now. So when it's all said and done, we'll have one 4% bracket on taxable income from an individual perspective. It doesn't seem to have had too much of an impact on income tax revenues, and we've seen an increase in sales tax revenue, but you're still able to operate the government well within the bounds of the revenues that we produce. But there's some out there, Kent, that would say, when are we going to cut spending, and that in not doing so, Republicans in our legislature are really not conservative. You just mentioned, for example, that this new funding formula will result in $250 million or so, I believe, of additional education funding. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, it's a fair point. I think we definitely as a party are, you talk about cutting and things like that. I think that the big thing though is that you look at where you're spending the money, and I think we've done the growth and spending we've had has been relatively responsible as it could be when you're talking about 25% of your budget. Yeah. And I think for something like education, that's a huge added expense for sure. But education is something that is more of an investment. And we talk about this all the time. But when we look at economic development projects, they're not necessarily always looking at. Our tax code is relatively competitive compared to the bigger states, and our land is cheap. Yep. Workforce is cheap, all that kind of stuff. What's missing, what has been missing in the past, is an educated workforce, and that's something that we've heard from industry people in different industries for at least the 5 or 6 years I've been involved. That more than anything, they want to see an educated workforce that can fill jobs. That's ready to go when they we provide the incentive to get the building open, but they don't have anybody to staff. So I think something like that, spending that money on education, we had a lot of work to do on that. A lot of ground to make up. We had, I think, done a relatively poor job funding our schools. And if you look at, around the South, it's not the case so much anymore. But if you look around the South, the money we were spending per pupil years back was just so much lower when you consider how much need we have in Mississippi compared to other states. So, I understand what people would say that, but I do think that, things like education, mental health, the corrections, all the problems we have.
Still a big problem.
Still a huge problem, and I think we still have a lot of work to do there. Yeah. And I think that those kinds of things are, yes, it's just on its face more money, but I think it's more money spent in a way that makes sense that will actually move the state forward.
Second biggest line item, as you're well aware, but for the benefit of our audience from a spending perspective, is, of course, the Medicaid program. Top in our general fund spending is education. It consumes slightly more than 50% of total outlays, and then next on the list is Medicaid, and that would be just the state's portion. Right. I was expecting it. I think you guys may have been as well, that the request would have been higher than it came in at. We went up, what, $10, $12 million, it seems.
Yeah. I don't really know. I never really try to predict what's going to happen with the budget.
But it came in under $1 billion.
Right.
And it's been higher in the past than it is now. In fact, we're not at the peak level we were as far as the state portion of Medicaid. I was expecting maybe a $100 million request.
Yeah, I think there was some talk about doing a much bigger.
Yeah.
I think that the Medicaid conversation is not over, and I think there's a lot of moving parts there. So maybe that's the reason why we kept it there. But yeah, I mean, I think there are definitely we can look around the country and see a lot of states that are doing a lot worse.
No doubt about it.
And that's not a great barometer. We don't want to measure ourselves against the dumbest people in the room, but but I do think by and large, I mean, we've done a good job of keeping things between the lines of what's reasonable.
So in addition to the restructuring of the education funding, I'm still calling that probably the marquee accomplishment of the session. There were a lot of things. The SAFER Act, I would say, was also, and that was 11th hour deal too.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So that was on very thin ice. In fact, I think it fell through.
Yeah, it was with the education funding down at the bottom of the frozen pond.
Had to fish it out.
Pull it out. Yeah. It was a lot of work.
I see that was a big accomplishment as well. Of course, we had the 2 extraordinary sessions where you guys voted on in short order. Packages for these 2 gigantic economic development projects, which I think honestly will produce more value for the state than any bills we pass down there.
Totally right about that.
And I said that to the governor the other day at the AWS groundbreaking. 1,000%, Gerard. I mean, and he's hyper focused on that, in a good way, on that as well. But a lot of things didn't make it across the finish line, and most of those are measures that pass the House. And then they meet their grave over in the Senate. The ballot initiative is one.
Right.
That just can't seem to get anything going there.
I don't understand that one. I really don't understand the problem that they've got with that bill. I think that we've done everything we can to provide them with something that they are happy with.
They being the Senate.
They being the Senate. I'm sorry. Yes. I'm referring to the Senate. I don't know what the holdup is. I mean, I'm personally have no fear about letting the voters vote on things. I think that if we're that worried about it, we need to open our eyes and maybe get more in step with what our voters want. But I don't. There's nothing that scares me about putting something back before the people to let them have a direct say. If we're not acting, give them a way to work around us. I mean, we had it for a long time and didn't have any major issues with it. I guess not that long of a time, but we had it for a while, and I think that there's definitely should be a way to get to yes on that, but it doesn't seem like that's been the case.
Yeah. Mobile sports betting is something I was hopeful for. Your colleague, Casey Urey, I thought did a great job with that legislation. Once again, it goes down to the Senate, and it doesn't go anywhere. And I just feel like to perhaps Senator David Blunt, who chairs the gaming committee in the Senate, a Democrat, it just seems like he was against it from the get-go. It didn't get anywhere.
Yeah, that was a huge disappointment, too. I mean, Representative Ure really worked very hard on that. That was one of the first issues we came out right out of the gate with. And, it just doesn't really – I can't understand the issue with expanding that and allowing mobile sports betting. I mean, I don't – I mean, it's happening. It's one of those things that's definitely happening regardless of whether or not it's legal or not. We might as well.
It's happening.
We might as well, sanction it and take a little bit of the money off of it, and do it the right way, because it's like you said, it's happening regardless.
I don't know if you've seen the results of North Carolina. They enacted legislation, mobile sports betting, authorizing it, and just went online in March. The first 3 weeks. They had 3 weeks of operations in the month of March, generated about $350 million of gross wager revenue, and that produced, based on their tax rate, about $65 million in less than a month.
That's crazy.
For the state.
I mean,
that's half as much as a lottery in Mississippi produces in a year.
It's crazy. I mean, I know, and I don't do it because I follow the laws, but I know so many people that do, and I mean, again, we could do that, and people are already doing this. We're not preventing them from doing it. We could do that, take a little tax off of it, and then use that revenue.
Agreed.
Cut some taxes other places that makes more sense. I mean, it's a no-brainer to me. But
that's voluntary.
Right,
nobody's putting a gun to your head saying you got to send this into the Treasury. Right. So, man, I hope we can get that done. Something else before we go is at least partial repeal of the Certificate of Need laws. You guys did that, sent that down there, and Didn't get anywhere in the Senate, although we thought that was going to happen.
I know. I thought that was going to happen. I thought some of the alcohol reforms would happen.
Representative
They killed
Hank
those.
Zuber,
Zuber worked so hard on that, as he does every year. That failed in the Senate. I mean, not to target my Senate friends, but I do think there's a long list of things that our voters really want to see move forward, and we're moving it in the House, but we just can't seem to get it across the finish line in the Senate.
Well, I hope you don't give up on it. I know you won't. I hope we get back on all these issues in the next session. I know the Speaker of the House is still planning to pursue a lot of this legislation.
Oh, absolutely. I think this was a productive session. I think we're going to see an even more productive one next year, though.
Always good to see you, Representative Kent McCarty. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me, Gerard.
Yeah, man. We're stepping aside for a break right now. We're coming back with Tommy Lofton, Director of Mississippi Armed Forces Museum. Stay with